we didn't wake up to the problem of the Russian aggression until it was a bit too late. We clung on to a rosy view of Russia up until 2022. The last holdovers about don't, we can work with them. They left when the tanks rolled into Ukraine. Those last people left the community, if you will, when those Russian tanks rolled in. And then by then it was really too late. One of my jobs at NATO was working with all the other allies to look at the capabilities of all the allies to see if they had the capability to do what NATO needed them to do. So I know quite a bit about all the allied militaries and their capabilities and the political constraints under which they had to work. They used to come to NATO and have to report to our committee and say, I'm sorry, we're not going to meet even the 2% because of this and this and this. And what could you do? And so I think we've been able to get past that now over the past year or so. And that's where labor comes in. And I shouldn't be talking about this, about labor and your politics, but I think labor has been out for a while. And I think labor coming into seeing the state of things, they might have to rethink maybe some of their spending plans, which I know are domestic oriented, just like for Democrats in the US, that's where we are too. But we're in a place right now where we're going to have to really give defense more than their due. And I know politically that's going to be unpopular in UK. I know it. I know, and it's going to be unpopular in a lot of allied countries, including the United States. But we're in a place now where we need to do that.
You mentioned your expertise on the capabilities of NATO member states at the moment militarily.
Right.
What do we have? It's 32 member states, I believe, at the moment. How many of those do you think are in the state that they should be, capability-wise?
Poland is probably the closest.
So 1 out of 32.
Yeah. And the US, you could say that, but we've also got to worry about the Pacific. And if you put that into the equation, then we're stretched thin.
And it's just, when you say Poland, because of the amount of GDP they're spending on defense, is that the only criteria you believe, or is there other factors to take into account?
There's other factors. It's more than how much money you spend. It's what do you spend it on? And I always say, and your willingness to use it. You can buy an airplane, but if you don't volunteer for any NATO missions, then what good is your purchasing the airplane? So, but I think what I would say is that nations are spending more money. As you point out, the polls are like at 4%, but they're buying a lot of South Korean equipment because it can be delivered quickly. They've got that sense of urgency to them. So do the Balts. But the Balts are tiny, but the thing is, the Poles are just driving their defense procurement. They're driving their military, and that kind of drive you're starting to see in some allied countries. France, you're seeing it. I'm hoping to see it in the UK. There's somewhat of it in the US, but we're, as I said, complicated by the China paradigm. So really, it is what they spend their money on, and then another thing too. It's more than just equipment. You can have great defense spending. You can buy a lot of equipment, but if you don't have the troops to use the equipment, or the troops aren't trained correctly, or they're not deployable. They're like the Turks in some ways. They're a huge military, but they never leave Turkey except to go into northern Syria. But the problem is that with the Germans too, we don't have a lot of the core problems that are plaguing us in terms of logistics, combat service support. These are some terms of art in the military that aren't well known. But the backbone to a military force is not just the equipment that they use. It is the logistics, it is the intelligence, it's the medical services, it's a lot of things called combat service support that you've got to have to make an army effective. And that is always where you cut first. And so now we find ourselves buying new aircraft or buying other things, but that core, that backbone, I don't think it's being given the attention that it needs. If you don't have transport aircraft, if you don't have refuelers, if you don't have these enablers to help you get to the fight, then what good are you? And that's always been a problem at NATO. So again, it's not just the 2%. It's not just what you buy in terms of end items. But it's also this combat service support that you don't hear a lot about because it's only the nerds like myself who talk about it. But that's the backbone that you need. And an example of that is when the United States goes somewhere, like if we deploy to Haiti in a crisis or something like that, you see us go in, we take over an airfield, we quickly bring it up to standards. You can put in a lot of throughput, for aircraft, and they're bringing in logistics, and you've seen us do that. That's combat service support. That's logistics. That is the backbone at work. And if nations can't do that, they can't get to the fight.
You've mentioned as well the importance of demonstrating that you are prepared to use your deterrence if needed.
Right.
How significant is Operation Steadfast Defender in demonstrating that from a NATO perspective, even if militarily the army and the RAF and the air forces of NATO members are not what they should be? Does things like Operation Steadfast Defender do go a long way to demonstrate that actually we are ready and willing to use the deterrent?
That's exactly right. Steadfast Defender was the exercise and the type of exercise all of us were hoping we would see NATO do. We used to do those, they were called Reforger back in the 1980s and the 70s during the Cold War days. And Reforger was a huge exercise that brought over uh, something like 12 divisions from the United States across the Atlantic in like 12 days, or 14 divisions in 14 days, something like that. It was a huge movement of U.S. forces into Europe and then marrying up with pre-positioned equipment and with European allies and then moving to the front lines on the inter-German border. It was a huge exercise. We had to do it to make sure we could do it quickly, but it was a symbol to the Soviets at the time that we were ready, able, and capable of doing this. And it was a signal to them each time that helped us with deterrence. If we couldn't do it, if we'd never practiced it, and so the Russians or the Soviets were led to think that, well, maybe the U.S. can't even get here. That weakens your deterrence. But if your deterrence is based on showing your opponent that you've got what it takes to get to where you need to go to fight them, and you're willing to do it, that's the cornerstone of deterrence. That's what Reforger, which stood for Return of Forces to Europe, Reforger. So, so this other exercise is along those lines, and so it was, and I guarantee you, the next time that they do it, it'll be even bigger, because it's doing the kinds of exercises that we need to do now, because we've lost the muscle memory of large-scale reinforcements in the U.S. military, in the U.S. Navy. I mean, you don't practice this all the time, and certainly not after the end of the Cold War. So I predict we'll see more of steadfast jazz type of exercises where we get that muscle memory back, and we show Putin that we're really serious.
I want to ask you a couple of questions about the mood in Washington. You're in Washington at the moment. You're at the NATO forum. What are the kind of conversations that you're having with people? Is it all about the possibility of a second Trump presidency? Is it about what Russia's doing in Ukraine? What are the conversations that seeming on the edges of what the media might see that are going on behind the scenes amongst people like yourself who really know the issues that are behind the headlines?
Well, I think a lot of us shake our heads and we just look at each other and go, "Can you believe this?" Whether it's the state of our presidential elections, Trump versus Biden, and the choices that we have to make here, whether it is that we are returning NATO to this wartime footing that we thought we wouldn't see again, wrongly, but we thought that those days were over, and here we are, right back smack dab in the middle of that. And talking about what the next steps are, Ukraine membership, the kinds of things that you would think we'd be talking about, certainly are being talked about, but under this cloud of U.S. politics. And what does this mean if Trump comes in? And that's what's being talked about over the coffee and in the hallways here is just what you would expect it to be.
Has the
And the weather,
conscription,
of course, the
of
weather
course,
here is broiling us, and so yeah.
absolutely. Has the word conscription come up at all in your conversations with anyone?
As a matter of fact, the conversation about conscription does come up. In fact, it came up a couple of days ago. We did a media call here at CNAS, and we talked about conscription. And I think that is more and more on people's minds in terms of trying to make sure we have the sailors for the Royal Navy and the pilots for the RAF and for the U.S. Air Force and stuff. I think, are we going to have to do that in the modern military force where so much depends on people who know IT and AI and things that we weren't worried about in the Cold War days, but are very, really specialists and trying to find those that would come into the military who could get much higher paying jobs in Silicon Valley. Can we get them into the military and the high tech side? Yeah. So I think conscription is being whispered now. Is that a way we can deal with recruitment problems that we all have? All of us have this, including here in the U.S. And it's something that we're comparing notes on, well, how would you do it? How does the U.S. do it now? On Capitol Hill, it's being discussed a little bit. Do we do selective service now compulsory for men and women who turn 18? And so it's being talked about, and talk about a powerful signal. Should we begin to do that? That will be a signal to Putin that we are in fact gearing up, and a signal to our own people. Because here in the U.S., if you talk to someone out on the street, if they overheard what we were saying, they wouldn't believe their ears. That we were dealing with such a tension-filled situation on Europe. But if suddenly coming out of Capitol Hill, there is some new laws dealing with the draft, as we call it, that would be quite a wake-up call. And it could be politically sensitive too. So it's something you have to, at this stage, only whisper about.
Thank you for watching Frontline from Times Radio, the interview series bringing you expert analysis on the world's conflicts, particularly the war in Ukraine. For more, you can listen to Times Radio. You can also go to the Times website, take out a digital subscription, and have access to all the reporting done by our foreign correspondents in Ukraine and indeed elsewhere around the world. And also listen to the Times' World in 10 podcast every day. We take you through the latest developments all in 10 minutes. That's the Times' World in 10 podcast. Thank you very much indeed again for watching Frontline from Times Radio.